I told myself it was a harmless lie, more like borrowing a life for one morning. My twin sister, Sloane, had the resume, the polished LinkedIn, the clean credit history, the kind of confidence that didn't flinch under fluorescent lights. I had rent past due, a checking account that blinked red, and a stomach that tightened every time my phone buzzed. So when she called me at 6:12 a.m., from the shoulder of the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, voice shaking, tire blown, interview in Midtown in less than 2 hours, I heard myself say, "I'll go," like it was nothing, like it wouldn't change anything. By the time I stepped into the lobby of Vesper and Grey, glass, marble, and the subtle smell of expensive coffee, I was wearing Sloane's blazer, and her name, rain traced slow lines down the towering windows, turning Manhattan into a watercolor of headlights and umbrellas. The receptionist smiled as if she'd already decided I belonged. "Ms. Hart," she said, and the sound of it landed on my skin like a borrowed perfume. The interview went. Too well. I answered questions the way Sloane would, measured, bright, slightly amused, while my real self watched from somewhere behind my ribs, praying I wouldn't say a childhood detail wrong, praying my voice wouldn't crack on a word like future. Around the conference table, executives nodded, impressed. Someone laughed at a joke I didn't mean to make. My hands didn't stop shaking until I wrapped them around a paper cup and felt the heat anchor me back into my body. Then the elevator doors opened, and she walked out. Isla Wren, the CEO, looked like the kind of woman the city made room for without being asked. Not loud, not trying, just a certain. She scanned the room once, eyes cool and attentive, and when they landed on me, something shifted. Not recognition, exactly. More like interest sharpened into a question. She didn't greet the panel. She didn't even sit. She only said, calm as a blade, "I'd like to speak with her alone." If this story pulled you in, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments which city and country you're watching from. Because what happened behind that closed door was the moment my life stopped being mine to control. The door closed behind us with a sound that felt heavier than it should have. Soft, controlled, final. Isla Wren didn't gesture for me to sit. She moved to the window instead, hands in the pockets of her tailored trousers, watching the rain stripe the glass 30 floors above the city. From this angle, Manhattan looked quieter, almost obedient. My pulse thudded in my ears. I reminded myself to breathe like Sloane would, slow, unbothered, prepared. "Ms. Hart," she said at last, without turning around. Her voice was even, low, practiced. "Your answers were excellent." A pause. Too excellent. She turned then, and the room seemed to recalibrate around her. I felt it in my posture, in the way my shoulders pulled back without permission. "Tell me," she continued, eyes steady, "how did you learn to speak about risk like someone who's actually taken it?" I swallowed. The truth perched on my tongue, reckless and bright. Instead, I reached for the nearest half-truth. "Experience," I said. It wasn't a lie, just not the experience she meant. Her gaze narrowed, not suspicious, curious, as if she'd just spotted a flaw in a diamond and wanted to know whether it made the stone more valuable. She circled the room once, slow steps on carpet that muted everything but intent. "You don't sound like a candidate," Isla said. "You sound like a contingency." She stopped close enough that I caught the faint scent of bergamot and paper. And contingencies interest me. The air between us held, taut as a wire. I told myself not to fidget. Sloane never fidgeted. "Tell me about your last failure," she said. The question hit harder than any technical prompt. Failure wasn't on Sloane's resume. It was on mine, written in late notices and polite rejections. I thought of the cafe job I'd quit after the manager learned I was covering rent for both of us. I thought of the night I slept on our bathroom floor, counting tiles, convincing myself that survival counted as ambition. I learned where I was pretending, I said carefully, and where I wasn't. Isla studied me like a map. That's an odd answer. Then, almost to herself, odd answers tend to be honest. She stepped back, granting space. I don't care about polish, she added. I care about pressure, about what someone becomes when there's nowhere left to hide. Her eyes softened, not with mercy, but with recognition. It startled me more than suspicion would have. She moved to her desk and tapped a tablet awake. You're early in your career, she said, on paper, a beat. But you carry yourself like someone who's already paid a price. She looked up. Why are you here, really? The room felt smaller. The lie felt heavier. I could feel it, an invisible seam pulling at the edges of everything. My mouth opened, closed. In the silence, I realized something frightening and true. I wanted to tell her, not because I was cornered, because she was listening. I needed a door, I said. Any door that didn't lead backward. Isla nodded once. Doors, she repeated. Yes. She stood and came around the desk, close again, but this time angled. Less interrogation, more alignment. Here's what I'm going to do, she said. I'm going to recommend you for the role. My breath caught. And I'm going to ask you to start immediately. Relief surged, sharp and dizzying. Then she added, on one condition. The wire between us tightened again. You'll work directly with me for the first 90 days. No buffers, no committees. Her gaze held mine. I want to see how you move when the stakes are real. The room swayed, just slightly. 90 days with Isla Wren. 90 days of proximity. Of being seen. The lie thrummed under my skin, louder now. I can do that, I heard myself say. Sloane's voice, my courage. Good, Isla said. Because I don't hire resumes. I hire people. She extended her hand. I took it. Her grip was warm, firm, unhesitating. Something in my chest shifted, quiet, irreversible. Welcome to Vesper and Gray, she said. Ms. Hart. As I left her office, the hallway seemed longer than before. I caught my reflection in the glass. Sloane's blazer, my eyes. The lie was no longer a shield. It was a bridge. And somewhere behind me, in an office that smelled like rain and certainty, Isla Wren had decided I was worth crossing for. By the second week, my calendar stopped belonging to me. Meetings appeared without notice. Late-night revisions landed in my inbox with Isla copied but no commentary. And I learned the quiet codes of her schedule the way sailors learn weather. When Isla was silent, things were urgent. When she asked questions, she was already convinced. When she invited me to walk, never meet, always walk, it meant she wanted to think out loud. With me. That realization settled into my chest with equal parts pride and fear. Our walks usually ended up circling Bryant Park after hours, the city softened by drizzle or fog. The benches empty, the chess tables abandoned. Isla spoke about pressure like it was a language she'd grown fluent in as a child. I listened the way I always had, whole-bodied, attentive, without trying to impress. She noticed. She always noticed. You don't interrupt, she said once, glancing sideways at me. Most people are just waiting for their turn. I shrugged, a small smile. I like understanding the ending before I comment on the middle. She laughed, surprised, and the sound warmed something in me that had been cold for years. The text started after that, short, intentional. A question about a market shift at 9:47 p.m., a photo of the skyline at midnight with a single word. Still? That felt like an invitation disguised as curiosity. I told myself this was mentorship. I told myself it was proximity, not intimacy. But when she wrote my name, Sloane, I felt the lie press between us like a third presence, watching, waiting. The night everything tipped, the office was nearly empty. Rain hammered the windows hard enough to make the lights blur. Isla had called me back after a board prep session that went poorly, her jaw set, shoulders tight. We spread papers across the conference table, working through contingencies, our voices low. At some point, the conversation drifted. First to leadership, then to loneliness, then to the unguarded edges neither of us usually showed. People assume certainty means comfort, she said quietly. It doesn't. I looked at her and saw the cost of being believed without being known. I don't remember deciding to reach for her hand. I remember the moment before it happened. The space between us charged, breath shallow, eyes locked. My fingers brushed hers, tentative, a question. She didn't pull away. She turned her palm up instead, inviting the truth of the touch. The room seemed to hush. When she leaned in, it wasn't fast. It wasn't careful either. It was deliberate. Our first kiss tasted like rain and restraint breaking. Warm. Certain. The kind that rearranges priorities. We stopped before it went further. We both knew why. Isla rested her forehead against mine, exhaling. This complicates things, she murmured. I nodded, heart racing. It already did, I said. She smiled then, soft, almost relieved, and the smile felt like permission, not to rush, to continue. After that, we learned how to be discreet. Dinners in quiet neighborhoods. A late movie where we sat apart until the lights dimmed. Mornings when she handed me coffee without a word, and our fingers lingered. The city became our accomplice. Reflections in glass, crosswalks at dawn, the hush of elevators that carried secrets upward. Every moment with her felt borrowed and electric. Every moment away sharpened the ache. The lie grew heavier. I felt it when she traced circles on my wrist and asked about my childhood. I felt it when she spoke my name like it was an answer. Loving her under my sister's identity twisted something in me I couldn't ignore. I began to rehearse confessions in the shower, in the mirror, on the subway. None of them survived the look she gave me when she was happy. Unguarded, present, real. One night, after we kissed goodnight outside her building, Isla caught my hand. Stay, she said. Not a command, a request. I almost said yes. I almost let the lie win. Instead, I kissed her once more, slow, aching, and whispered, soon. It was the truest thing I could offer in that moment, and it broke my heart to say it. Back in my apartment, I lay awake listening to the city breathe. The job, the love, the life opening in front of me. All of it balanced on a truth I hadn't yet told. I understood then that passion doesn't only pull you forward. Sometimes it demands a reckoning. And I knew, with a clarity that frightened me, that if I didn't choose honesty soon, the cost would be higher than losing her. It would be becoming someone I couldn't love back. The first time I stayed the night, it wasn't planned. Isla's building went dark during a sudden power outage. The elevator stalled between floors with a shudder that made her laugh under her breath. We climbed the last 6 flights by phone light, breathless, rain-soaked, ridiculous. Inside her apartment, the city glowed through the windows like a held breath. Candles came out of a drawer as if they'd been waiting. So did honesty, partial, fragile, offered in pieces. We talked on the floor with our backs against the couch, knees touching, wine forgotten on the counter. She told me about her mother's illness, about the way responsibility calcified too early and never quite softened. I told her about working 2 jobs in college, about learning how to be invisible and indispensable at the same time. I avoided the years that mattered most, the names that would unravel everything. When she reached for me, It was gentle at first, as if asking permission again. I said yes without words. The kiss was slow and certain, the kind that answers a question before it's asked. We stayed there a long while, unhurried, letting the night settle around us. Morning arrived pale and kind. We made coffee in silence, a domestic truce neither of us commented on. Isla stood barefoot at the window, hair loose, wrapped in her robe. I watched her and felt the ache sharpen into resolve. I wanted this, wanted her. But the wanting came with a ticking clock. When she turned and smiled, the room felt like a promise I hadn't earned yet. Work complicated everything. People noticed the way she asked for my input first, the way her gaze found me across rooms. I learned to temper it, step back, speak last, keep my hands folded. She learned restraint too, though sometimes she failed at it, sending a message that said only now, and meeting me by the fire stairs with a kiss that burned away the afternoon. We weren't reckless. We were deliberate. That somehow made it worse. The sister-shaped shadow followed me everywhere. Sloane called once, apologetic, oblivious. "You saved me," she said. "I owe you." I stared at my ceiling and said nothing, the lie tightening like a knot pulled too fast. That night, Isla traced the scar on my collarbone and asked where it came from. I told her a truth that wasn't the one she needed. She accepted it. That hurt more than suspicion would have. The reckoning arrived on a clear Thursday, disguised as paperwork. HR flagged a discrepancy, minor, procedural, solvable. Isla brought the folder to dinner, her tone careful. "We'll clear this," she said. "Together." The word together landed between us, heavy with everything I hadn't said. I felt the moment tip. If I didn't speak now, I never would. I told her my real name. I told her why I went to the interview. I told her when I fell in love with her, earlier than I should have, deeper than I meant to. I didn't excuse it. I didn't defend it. I finished by saying, "I'll accept whatever you decide." Silence took the room. Isla's face closed. Not anger, not cruelty. Precision. "You should leave," she said quietly. "Tonight." I nodded. I stood. At the door, I paused. "I'm sorry," I said, finally meaning the whole sentence. She didn't answer. The elevator carried me down like a verdict. Days passed, then weeks. Work became formal, distant, correct. I did my job. I kept my head down. I learned how absence can bruise. When she finally asked me to meet, it was not in an office or an apartment, but in a small cafe at the edge of the park, morning light spilling across the table like mercy. "I can't undo how we started," Isla said, "but I won't pretend what we felt wasn't real." She slid a card across the table, an offer, revised, honest. "If you want to stay, it's as you. And if you want to see me," she added softer, "it's outside these walls." I took the card with a steady hand. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent and bright. Inside, something loosened. We didn't kiss then. We didn't need to. We walked out together into the daylight side by side, choosing the harder truth, and the hope that came with it. We learned how to meet without hiding. Not all at once. Not easily. At first it was careful. Neutral places, unremarkable hours, conversations that stayed on the safe side of yearning. A bookstore near Union Square where we pretended to browse separate aisles. A quiet diner in Chelsea where we sat in adjacent booths and passed notes like teenagers with something to lose. The restraint felt unnatural after everything we'd already shared, but it was necessary. We were rebuilding trust from the foundation up, and foundations take patience. Work settled into a new shape. I was no longer an extension of Isla's will. I was my own person, with my own title and my own boundaries. She respected them. More than that, she protected them. In meetings, she addressed me by my real name, steady and clear, as if to say to the room and to herself, "This is who she is, and it's enough." The first time she did, something in my chest unknotted. Outside the office, the city softened again. One evening, after a week that had stretched too long, Isla texted me a single address and a time, no context, no expectations. I arrived to find a narrow restaurant tucked between a laundromat and a closed record store, lights low, music barely there. She was already seated, jacket off, sleeves rolled, looking like someone who had chosen to be present rather than impressive. Dinner unfolded slowly. We talked about books we loved and cities we'd almost moved to. We avoided the past, not because it hurt, but because we wanted the night to belong to itself. When the check came, she didn't reach for it out of habit. She looked at me instead, a small question in her eyes. I smiled. "I've got it." She let me. The equality mattered. Outside, the air was warm and damp. We stood too close without touching, the way people do when they're deciding whether to cross a line they've already crossed before. Isla tilted her head, searching my face. "Is this okay?" she asked. It was the simplest question. It was everything. I answered by stepping into her space. The kiss was different this time. Slower. Grounded. Not an escape, but a choice. Her hand settled at my waist, familiar and newly careful all at once. I felt the city blur around us. Sirens, footsteps, laughter, until there was only the warmth of her mouth and the quiet certainty beneath it. When we pulled back, we were both smiling, the kind that comes from relief as much as affection. We didn't rush home together. We walked. We talked. We laughed at nothing. And when we finally parted at the subway entrance, Isla brushed her thumb along my knuckles and said, "Tomorrow." It wasn't a promise. It was an invitation. Tomorrow came, and so did the next day. We found a rhythm that belonged to us. Nights at my place where we cooked badly and kissed often. Mornings at hers where sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, and neither of us checked our phones. What we felt didn't fade with honesty. It deepened. Trust made room for it to grow naturally, inevitably. Sometimes, late at night, I'd catch Isla watching me like she was recalibrating her life around a new constant. "I didn't plan for this," she admitted once, fingers tracing the line of my shoulder. I kissed her temple. Neither did I. The truth felt light now, livable. We weren't perfect. We argued about time and expectations. We learned how to pause before old instincts took over. But when she reached for me, it was with certainty that had nothing to do with power. When I chose her, it was without borrowed names or borrowed courage. The city kept moving. So did we. And for the first time since that morning in the rain, my life felt like it belonged to me. Warm, complicated, honest, and shared by someone who saw all of it and stayed anyway. The rumors didn't arrive all at once. They drifted in, subtle as humidity. An offhand glance held too long. A pause after my name in a meeting. A question framed as curiosity that carried the weight of assumption. Vesper and Gray was efficient that way. No gossip without plausible deniability. Isla handled it with the same discipline she brought to everything else. Calm, precise, unreadable. I learned to do the same. What we shared didn't disappear under scrutiny. It learned how to breathe. Pressure came from the board next. Not accusations, questions, about optics, about precedent, about risk. Isla listened without flinching, took notes, thanked them for their concern. Later that night in my kitchen, she leaned against the counter and exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. "They want me to choose," she said, "as if this is a lever." I crossed the room and wrapped my arms around her from behind. "You're allowed to choose yourself," I said. She turned, rested her forehead against mine. "So are you." We stopped being careful in private. What we felt returned with a steadiness that surprised me. less frantic, more sure. We learned each other's tells, the way she went quiet before a decision, the way I paced when anxious. We met friends separately, then together, then not at all, content with the small universe we'd built. Nights blurred into mornings, mornings into plans. The city watched and moved on. The test came publicly, the way these things always do. A conference in San Francisco. A panel question about leadership and boundaries that wasn't really a question. Isla answered it cleanly, directly, without spectacle. Boundaries exist to protect people, she said, not to keep them apart. The room applauded. Later in the hallway, she took my hand, not hidden, not defiant, just present. It felt like a decision made out loud. When the offer came to me, another firm, more money, fewer complications, I brought it to her without drama. We sat on the floor, backs against the couch, like the night the power went out. "What do you want?" she asked. I smiled. "To keep choosing us, wherever that is." She nodded. "Then we'll make it work." I stayed. Not because of her title or her gravity, because the life we were building felt earned. Because something that survives truth doesn't burn out. It settles into something fierce and warm. On a quiet Sunday, we walked the park at dusk, hands laced, city lights coming on one by one. Isla squeezed my fingers. "I'm glad you said yes," she said. I looked at her. Really looked. And knew the answer would always be the same. Being seen changed the temperature of everything. It wasn't dramatic at first. No headlines, no speeches, just small, irreversible choices made in daylight. Isla invited me to a gallery opening she'd usually attended alone. We arrived together, coats brushing, hands separate until the door closed behind us, and the room absorbed us without comment. A few looks landed. Most didn't. The art did its quiet work. So did we. When someone asked how we knew each other, Isla answered simply, "We're together." No qualifiers, no defenses. The word felt like a key turning. The board meeting that followed was harder. Not hostile. Measured. Concerns phrased as hypotheticals. Risks framed as stewardship. Isla listened, then spoke without notes. "I won't build a culture that punishes honesty," she said. "And I won't ask anyone to live smaller, so others can feel comfortable." The room held its breath. When it exhaled, the decision was already made. Policy clarified, lines drawn. Not because of us, but because of what we represented when we refused to hide. We celebrated quietly. Takeout on the living room floor. Bare feet, music low. We kissed slowly, unhurried, the kind of kiss that felt like affirmation instead of escape. Afterward, we sat close and talked about ordinary things. Groceries, weekends, a trip we kept postponing. The ordinary felt radical. Work tested me in different ways. A high-visibility project. A deadline that cut close. I owned it. Asked for help, took responsibility, delivered. Isla stayed out of it publicly, exactly as promised. Privately, she checked in the way partners do. "How are you holding up?" Not advice, care. When the project landed well, the praise came from places that had once doubted me. It didn't feel like vindication. It felt like arrival. One evening, rain found us again. Soft this time, forgiving. We stood under the awning of a corner store, sharing a paper bag of fries, grease, and joy, and the city humming around us. Isla watched me like she was memorizing a map she planned to keep. "You know," she said, "I used to think love was a liability." I smiled. "And now?" She shrugged, gentle. "Now I think it's leverage, the good kind." We booked the trip. Nothing extravagant. a coastal town where the night smelled like salt and bread. Mornings came slow. Afternoons were spent walking with no agenda. We held hands openly, kissed without checking who might see, learned each other in a context that wasn't earned under pressure. It mattered. When we came back, the city felt less sharp. The last test arrived quietly, a profile request, a chance to define the story before someone else did. Isla asked me what I wanted. I thought of borrowed names and closed doors, of truth learned the hard way. "Tell it plainly," I said, without spectacle. She did. The piece ran. It passed. The world kept spinning. On a late night months later, we returned to Bryant Park after hours. Benches empty, chess tables abandoned, the city breathing. Isla took my hands and said, "This is the part I didn't plan for." I leaned in, forehead to hers. Me neither. We kissed, slow, certain, and the past finally loosened its grip. The long view arrived without fanfare. It showed up in the shape of grocery lists taped crookedly to my fridge. In the way Isla started leaving a spare blazer at my place, and I kept a toothbrush at hers without either of us announcing the shift. It arrived as shared calendars and quiet negotiations. Whose dinner with friends, whose deadline, whose bad day got first claim on the evening. Love, I learned, wasn't a crescendo. It was a cadence. We argued more honestly now. About time. About how much of ourselves work still demanded. About my reflex to disappear when things felt too good. And her habit of overstructuring feelings like meetings. The fights didn't scare me the way they used to. They ended with repair. Hands finding hands. Apologies spoken before sleep. Laughter returning when the tension broke. What we felt didn't vanish in the process. It changed. It learned patience. It learned how to wait and how to choose. One night, after a dinner that ran long with friends who knew us as a unit, we walked home through streets still warm from the day. Isla stopped under a streetlight and turned to me, eyes thoughtful. "I don't want us to live on adrenaline," she said. "I want us to last." I felt the weight of the words settle into something solid. "Then we build boring," I said, smiling, "and protect it fiercely." She laughed, pulled me close, kissed me like a promise kept. Work stabilized. The noise faded. New rumors replaced the old ones. I found my footing in rooms that once intimidated me, speaking without checking for permission. Isla let me lead when it mattered, and followed without losing herself. At night, we fell into a rhythm, music low, windows cracked, the city a soft witness. What we felt lived there too, warm and familiar, rekindled by trust rather than secrecy. We talked about moving in without pretending it was a joke, about the closet space problem, about neighborhoods that felt like compromise in the best way. On a Sunday afternoon, we toured a place with light that made everything look kinder. Isla squeezed my hand and said nothing, which meant yes. We signed papers a month later and argued about paint colors like it was sacred work. The anniversary of the interview came quietly. Rain again, of course. We returned to the lobby of Vesper and Gray after hours, the marble reflecting our silhouettes like an earlier version of us had once passed through. Isla pressed her forehead to mine. "You changed my life," she said, plain and true. I thought of borrowed names and closed doors, and the courage it took to stop hiding. "You gave me mine back," I replied. At home that night, we cooked badly, danced worse, and laughed until the smoke alarm complained. Later, in the quiet, Isla traced the line of my jaw and asked, "Are you happy?" The question landed soft and real. I didn't have to think. "Yes," I said, "and I know why." Outside, the city kept breathing. Inside, we chose each other again. Not loudly, not once, but the way it lasts. Deliberately, in the small hours, with the door open to morning. The first time my past knocked on our door, it did so without warning. It was a Saturday morning softened by rain, the kind that made the city feel briefly forgiven. Isla was still asleep, one arm heavy across my waist, her breathing slow and unguarded. I lay there watching the ceiling, thinking about nothing at all, when the buzzer cut through the quiet. Sharp, insistent, real. I knew who it was before I answered. Some instincts never unlearn themselves. Sloane stood in the hallway holding 2 coffees and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. My sister always looked put together, even when she wasn't. Same face as mine, different armor. I was nearby, she said, which was a lie we both accepted. I stepped aside and let her in. The apartment still smelled like sleep and toast and Isla's perfume, subtle, warm, unmistakably ours. Sloane noticed. Of course she did. We sat at the kitchen counter, cups cooling between us. She talked first, filling the space the way she always had. Work updates, a promotion, gratitude that came too late to be comfortable. I never really thanked you, she said, eyes fixed on the mug. For that interview. You changed everything. The words landed heavier than she knew. I felt Isla's presence behind the bedroom door like a held breath. I didn't change your life, I said quietly. I changed mine. Sloane looked up then, really looked, and something in her expression shifted. What does that mean? She asked. I could have deflected. I could have protected the version of myself that still wanted approval. Instead, I told her, not all at once. Piece by piece. The name, the job, the woman, the love, the cost. The truth fell between us, fragile and final. When I finished, Sloane didn't speak right away. She reached across the counter and took my hand, grounding, familiar. I spent years thinking I was the brave one, she said. Turns out I was just safer. Her eyes shone. I'm proud of you. The relief was physical. My shoulders sagged, my breath stuttered. I hadn't realized how much I'd been carrying until it loosened. Isla came out of the bedroom then, hair damp, t-shirt soft with sleep, entirely herself. The sight of her in the same space as my sister felt surreal, like overlapping timelines finally agreeing to coexist. I introduced them properly. No explanations, no defenses. Isla shook Sloane's hand, warm and steady. I've heard a lot about you, she said. Sloane smiled, a little dazed. I'm sure you have. After Sloane left, the apartment felt too quiet. Isla leaned against the counter, studying my face. Are you okay? She asked. I nodded, then shook my head. She crossed the room and pulled me into her, my cheek against her collarbone, her hand firm at my back. The intimacy of it, being held without questions, undid me. Thank you, I whispered, for letting me do that my way. She kissed my hair. There was never another way. That night, we held on to each other gently. No urgency, no proving, just warmth and certainty, and the quiet knowledge that nothing else was waiting to ambush us from the shadows. Later, curled together, Isla traced the line of my jaw with her thumb. I don't want you carrying this alone anymore, she said. The words felt like a vow. The next test came at work. Not overt, not cruel. Subtle pressure. The kind that asks you to compromise in increments small enough to rationalize. A suggestion that Isla step back publicly. A reminder about optics delivered with polite smiles. Isla listened, took notes, then closed her folder. We're not hiding, she said calmly. We're doing this correctly. When the meeting ended, she met my eyes across the room. Not reassurance, not defiance. Partnership. That night, we walked the city longer than usual. Rain slicked the sidewalks, neon bleeding into puddles. Isla stopped beneath a streetlight and took my face in her hands. I choose you, she said, like a statement of fact. Warmth spread through me. Not reckless, not consuming. Steady. Earned. I kissed her there, openly, the city bearing witness without caring. Back home, we talked about the future the way people do when they're done pretending it doesn't exist. Not timelines, not promises, possibilities, space, what staying looked like when it was chosen daily. When we finally fell asleep, it was with the quiet confidence of two people no longer bracing for impact. I understood then that the hardest part hadn't been lying. It had been believing I wasn't allowed to want this much. And as Isla slept beside me, hand curled instinctively into mine, I knew the next challenges wouldn't ask whether we were strong enough. They would ask whether we were willing to keep choosing each other in the open. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the answer. The hardest part wasn't the conflict. It was the quiet that followed it. Life didn't explode. No ultimatums, no dramatic exits. Instead, it narrowed. Schedules overlapped less. Messages became efficient where they'd once been curious. Even our apartment, so recently claimed with laughter and reckless hope, felt cautious, like it was waiting to see which version of us would show up at the door each night. The work intensified. Isla's visibility grew, as did the expectations that came with it. Every decision she made seemed to carry a second shadow now, one that whispered, "This is what love costs." I watched her shoulders tighten in ways she didn't notice. I learned the difference between her silences, the thoughtful ones, the exhausted ones, the dangerous ones. I coped the way I always had, by shrinking, not dramatically, not consciously, just small withdrawals, offering space she hadn't asked for, saying it's fine when it wasn't, telling myself that loving someone powerful meant becoming easier to accommodate. Isla noticed, of course. She always did. One night, after a dinner neither of us tasted, she set her fork down and said, "You're leaving before you go." Her voice wasn't accusatory. It was tired. The words landed with surgical accuracy. "I'm trying not to be another thing you have to manage," I said. She leaned back, eyes closing for a moment. "I don't want manageable," she said quietly. "I want you." The argument came then, not loud, not cruel, but deep. About autonomy, about fear, about how love can turn into self-erasure if no one is watching for it. I admitted what I'd been afraid to say out loud, that sometimes I felt like a guest in her life, even now. She admitted what she'd been hiding, that the thought of losing me had begun to shape her decisions in ways that scared her. We didn't resolve it that night. I slept facing the window. She slept facing me. The distance between us felt louder than the city. Days passed like that, functioning, polite, restrained. We kissed goodbye. We touched without lingering. What we felt didn't disappear, but it dimmed, waiting for permission to exist without guilt. I caught myself wondering if this was how things ended. Not with a break, but with a careful thinning. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon, in a hallway flooded with winter light. I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to. Two executives. My name spoken softly, like a liability wrapped in concern. She's talented, but the rest didn't matter. What mattered was the way Isla had been protecting me without telling me, and the way I'd been receding without trusting her enough to let her. That night, I didn't wait for the right moment. "I don't want to disappear to make this easier," I said, standing in the doorway, coat still on, heart bare. "And I don't want to be protected like a secret, even a respected one." Isla crossed the room in 2 strides. "I never wanted that," she said. "I wanted us intact." "Then stop choosing for me," I said, voice shaking, "and stop letting me choose less for myself." The silence that followed was long and charged and necessary. Then Isla did something she'd rarely done in her life. She let go. Not of me, but of control. You're right, she said. I've been bracing for loss instead of trusting what we built. She took my hands, grounding us both. I don't want a love that survives because it's quiet. I want one that survives because it's honest. The kiss that followed wasn't gentle. It was urgent, reclaiming. A reminder of everything we'd almost muted out of fear. Her hands framed my face like she needed to anchor herself to something real. Mine found her waist, solid and familiar and chosen. We broke apart breathless, foreheads touching, the world recalibrating. That night, everything we felt returned, not reckless, not apologetic, assured. We stayed awake talking until dawn, dismantling old reflexes and naming new boundaries. No shrinking, no managing, no vanishing acts. By morning, the apartment felt like ours again. As sunlight crept across the floor, Isla brushed my hair from my face and said, "If we're going to fail, it won't be because we were afraid to take up space." I smiled, exhausted and whole. Then let's not fail quietly. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent as ever. Inside, we chose visibility over comfort, and the choice felt like breathing again. The ending didn't arrive like a finish line. It came like a morning that finally felt quiet. Not empty. Quiet in the way a room feels after you've decided to stay in it. Winter softened into early spring, and with it, the city loosened its grip. We stopped measuring ourselves against what could go wrong. We started building toward what could last. The first public acknowledgement was small, almost mundane. A company event on a Thursday evening, nothing flashy. Isla asked me, plainly, if I wanted to come with her. Not as support, not as discretion, as her partner. I said yes without bracing for impact. That alone felt like victory. We arrived together, coats brushed clean, hands separate until they weren't. A few looks lingered, most didn't. Conversations flowed. When someone congratulated her on a recent win and turned to me with a polite smile, Isla slipped her hand into mine without comment, without emphasis. The gesture landed exactly where it needed to. Firm, calm, undeniable. I felt my chest expand like I'd been holding my breath for years. Later that night, back home, everything we felt found us again, but not in a rush. It unfolded slowly, laughter threaded through warmth, familiarity deepening instead of dulling the spark. What we had, I learned, doesn't fade when it's fed by safety. It sharpens. It roots. It knows where to land. We talked about the future without treating it like a negotiation. About trips we'd postponed long enough to want again. About whether we were city people forever or just for now. About space, not just where we lived, but how we held each other in it. We didn't make promises shaped like cages. We made ones shaped like doors. One evening, weeks later, Isla came home with a look I recognized. Decisive, quiet, unburdened. "I turned down the expansion," she said, setting her bag down. I blinked. "You what?" She smiled, small and real. "I don't want a life that only looks successful from the outside." She crossed the room and took my face in her hands. "I want one I can live in." I kissed her like the answer had been waiting all along. The anniversary of the interview arrived on a rainy afternoon, predictable as memory. We didn't plan anything elaborate. We walked the city instead, past glass towers and corner stores, past the places where we'd learned how to be careful and the ones where we'd learned how not to be. When we reached Bryant Park, the benches were empty again, the chess tables bare. The city breathed around us, uninterested and kind. "This is where it tilted," Isla said softly. I nodded. "This is where I stopped borrowing courage." She turned to me then, eyes steady. "I'm glad you walked through that door," she said. I smiled. I'm glad I stopped pretending to be someone else once I did. We kissed there, not hidden, not performative, just present. The kind of kiss that doesn't ask what comes next, because it already knows. Home settled into us after that. Plants that survived, dishes that didn't always get done, mornings where coffee cooled because we forgot about it, nights where the world felt far away and the apartment felt like an agreement renewed. Love became something we practiced, not something we proved. Sometimes I'd catch Isla watching me from across a room, like she was still surprised by the shape of this life. "What?" I'd ask. She'd shake her head, smile. "Nothing," she'd say. But it was never nothing. It was gratitude. It was recognition. It was the quiet astonishment of choosing and being chosen back. On a warm evening at the edge of spring, we stood by the window, city lights flickering on one by one. Isla wrapped her arms around me from behind, chin resting on my shoulder. "I don't want a grand ending," she murmured. I leaned into her. "Good," I said. "I want a true one." Outside, the city didn't pause. Inside, nothing was borrowed anymore. Not my name, not my courage. Not the life unfolding between us, steady, honest, and entirely ours. And this time, when the door closed behind us, it didn't feel like a risk. It felt like home. And if this story pulled you in, my Patreon has even more waiting for you. Exclusive stories, longer chapters, bonus scenes, and richer detail behind every romance and every twist. Everything's linked right below.